Well, we can't see who's all listening, but I feel sorry for you because you've missed the first 10 or 15 minutes of conversation that's happened with this fascinating panel while we were waiting to go live. My name is Scott Tarbet. I am a writer of speculative fiction. I do a lot of steampunk, a lot of science fiction, all rooted in the real world. And I like to keep everything real and technically correct. And one of the things that drew me to science fiction in the first place was, as a kid, I learned so much from reading science fiction novels. And those are my bona fides for even being here, to be able to listen to these two experts on the topic. Let me have you both introduce yourselves and present your credentials, and let's get going.
It appears Sarah is frozen at the moment, so I'll go first. Hello, my name is Shannon Babb. I am a trained hydrologist and geologist. I work for Central Utah Water as a professional curriculum developer. And I'm really excited to be on this panel because I love every excuse that I can get to nerd about rocks.
That's a great thing. While we're waiting for Sarah to come back in, let me tell our listeners that Shannon and I were introduced, and she asked the first question. She asked me, what was it that got you excited about this panel? Excuse me. And my answer was Guns, Germs, and Steel, the fantastic book by Jared Diamond that talks about the connections between societal development and mining around the world, among other things. But that's where my brain automatically went to. Shannon has a whole different take on it. Sarah, we'll wait for her to come back. She's back in the backstage room right now, waiting to get let in. But Sarah is a paleontologist by training and loves to talk about the development of the human race as reflected in geology. Oh, she's back. Thank goodness. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So sorry about that. Connectivity issues today. So my name is Sarah Seeley. I have a background in geology and a little bit of biology. And I'm a Paleolithic archaeologist. So I study human origins related archaeology and things related to the evolution of human anatomy and the human psyche and things like that, and how that correlates with the archaeological record. So human origins types of things is my particular specialty. And I also write science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So that's me.
Sarah also, I know we're not here to give plugs, but Sarah has one of the most interesting little books that I have ever seen in all of my years of being around indie authors. It's an orc love story. Y'all can check that out. Is this still available on Amazon?
Yes,
Sarah?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, and give me the title of that one.
It is called Blood Oath: An Orc Love Story.
An orc love story.
Mm-hmm.
Just the high conceptness of it all just tickles me. Okay, let's get right into our topic here. The mining it's a deep subject. I've been waiting to say that for a long time.
I was going to say that sounds like a fabulous pun. It's a deep subject.
It is a deep subject.
How deep can we mine the subject of mining?
how much material can we extract? How many substrata are there? So let's start with you and go all the way back to the Paleolithic and talk about the earliest indications that we have of.
Uh-oh. I can't hear you guys. Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no.
Okay, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay.
So
do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, so I got the earliest indications of, and that's all I got.
Of mining, going all the way back to the Paleolithic, and what effects it had.
So mining, when we're talking about early humans, so before Homo sapiens, and sort of our most recent relatives that are extinct. So mining would, it's kind of interesting applying the concept of mining to this, but it works. And basically it is, just kind of in a broader evolutionary sense, so different organisms are interested in different kinds of resources that help them with survival. So in particular, tools, tools might be used for other sorts of things, but if other animals are making tools, it's usually something related to trying to get at a food source, so subsistence related tools. So you might have chimpanzees, for example, that are using sticks to dig ants out of an anthill to eat, or you could, just going off into the other parts of the animal kingdom really quickly, for animals that use tools, you have like otters that use rocks to break clams open. So now kind of bringing this back to what does this have to do with mining? So what we're looking at in the Paleolithic is we have organisms that, looking at the anatomy of Australopithecus and Ardipithecus as well, which was a little bit older. So Ardipithecus is about 5 million years old. And Australopithecus, we start seeing around 3 million years ago. And then we get to Homo erectus, so within the genus Homo, around 1.5 million years ago. And what we start seeing is we see adaptations. First, we see adaptations for walking upright, and then we see other changes in the anatomy related to the hands. The last common ancestor that we shared with modern great apes would have had adaptations for being able to maneuver around in the trees. So long fingers that are curved, and long arms, and sort of shorter legs, and different things going on with the feet as well. But what we start seeing with the anatomy with Australopithecus and the Homo species is that we start seeing the fingers are getting shorter, and there's a broadening of the fingertips so we're starting to see a progression towards reliance on tools, and this adaptation that's kind of encompassing this tool use. So we're starting to see these different hominin species that were probably adapted for tools. Tool use, and this would have been related to subsistence. So that's a little bit of a long introduction, but getting back again to what this has to do with mining. So we're there's all kinds of things going on with the cognition as well related to this, and sort of greater group interdependence and cooperation and reliance on each other and things like that. And this is all connected to tool use. But what we're also seeing is that we're starting to see organisms that are interested in finding material that will break a certain way and that will work well. So you have to be able to conserve your energy, and you have to be able to recognize the qualities of that particular material, and you have to be able to conceptualize in your head, if I hit this a certain way, if I hit one rock with another a certain way, this is likely to break in a certain way, and I can break this a couple of times and make a nice sharp edge out of it. So you have to be able to conceptualize some of those things. And so there's different qualities for the kind of material that you can use to make stone tools. So some of the best material is sort of amorphous, so there's not a lot of crystalline structure. So something like obsidian would have been really, really nice. So this is volcanic glass, so there's not a crystalline structure. So the challenges with an internal crystalline structure is that if you go to break it, so crystals on a molecular level, the molecules are aligned a certain way. So minerals have places where the atomic bonds line up that are weaker and places where it's stronger, and these are form what are called cleavage planes. So if you have a fair amount of crystals, or larger crystals in particular, and you go to hit rocks, it's harder to control how that rock is going to break. So if you have something like granite that you go and you try to break it into pieces, because it has larger crystals in it, it's harder to get a nice sharp edge. It's harder to control how that rock is going to break. So you have organisms that are going to look for they have to be able to recognize and look for qualities of material and be able to pick this up and say, is this something that I can break it and it's going to be efficient and it's going to be nice and sharp, and I can see how to break it and how to control the material, or is this less efficient? And what we start seeing as well through time is that so early hominins, so probably Australopithecus. We don't have an exact correlate as to exactly which hominins were making the stone tools. We haven't found stone tools buried, or a particular hominin skeleton clutching a stone tool or something. So we use sort of a contemporaneous dating with ash layers to determine what hominin species were contemporaneous with certain early archaeological layers with stone tools. So I have lost my train of thought here. What we see with sort of earlier in the Oldowan, so the Oldowan is the oldest stone tool culture. There is the Lomequian, which is probably really an extension of the Oldowan, and that's been kind of classified separately, but for certain reasons, but it's probably connected to the Oldowan. So I'll just go with the Oldowan being the oldest. And the Oldowan is named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. Just so, yes, information. Yes. So what we see with older Oldowan material is that organism or the hominins were using material that was local. So whatever quality material that was local, that was the best quality that they could get. And as we move further along in time, getting closer to something called the Acheulean, where we're starting to see a little bit more sophistication in the archaeological record with the formation of these what are called large cutting tools. So a lot of them, sort of a popular one you might be able to recognize is called a hand axe. And this is just a typological name, so we don't exactly know what these stone tools might have been used for, but they've been given some names kind of based on what they look like. So this hand axe is kind of this teardrop shaped thing that's been broken a whole bunch of times. It's been very carefully shaped, and it has some nice edging on it. And also just kind of as a side thing with that, just kind of interesting things with that. They found some of these hand axes that are they're clearly have been created with a bit of care. There's a lot of work that's gone into it, but they're very large and they're very brittle, so it's not clear that they were used. Some of those were used for cutting, so there might have been an aesthetic element, or perhaps trying to show off skills to attract a mate or something like that. There's different suggestions for some of those kinds of things. Anyway, all peripheral to this, but So as we move further in time, we start to see that hominins are probably traveling out further and further to go find higher quality material. and bring it back. And they determine some of this by looking at the chemistry of the stone tools and then trying to find the volcanic source material and compare the it's called a genetic makeup, which is kind of interesting. It's not like a DNA genetic makeup, but to determine the chemical makeup of the stone tool, so they can see how far away that stone tool was sourced and how it got, how far that had to travel. So you start to see a development in cognition where you're seeing hominins traveling further and further away to get higher quality material like that glassy material over basaltic material. And then as you have hominins that are moving into Europe and Asia, there's a lot of flint up there. So there's a lot of high quality material, and you see a lot of stone tools made out of that kind of material as well. So that's in a nutshell.
Do you see concentrations of population around those sources?
What's found are the stone tools in particular localities. So they'll find deposits of stone tools. And there's different theories about what's going on there. So it could have been that, for example, there's kind of a home base theory that maybe we're starting to see a sense of, there's a central gathering place where we come together to live and to make our meals and things like that. So we're bringing an organism that we hunted or that we scavenged back to a home base to start processing it. But it's also possible that some of those tools were just made on site to cut up an organism. So they look at relationships between where those stone tools are found relative to, generally speaking, to large skeletons. And sometimes we find cut marks on those skeletons and things like that. So it's hard to say a lot about what's going on with population size and things like that. There's just some challenges with the archaeological record kind of deflating over time as well. So you could get several generations that are utilizing an area and their material gets concentrated in an area. And then as geological processes happen, you get kind of a collapse of what kind of information you can get out of that deposit. It all gets kind of concentrated. And it is difficult a little bit to figure out some things going on with the population. But yeah.
Okay. But from there, we jump into the development of trading networks, right? Shannon, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, North America actually helps give us some of this bridge, because flint and obsidian, we know were traded over massive geographic areas, and oftentimes they were trading for things like shells. So you get shells inland, which is a resource that doesn't naturally occur, and those valuable rocks were mined in quarries. Oftentimes these quarries were kept very secretive because you didn't want someone to raid your community's quarries, and they were visited. You harvested the amount of resources that you were going to process, and those were traded throughout North America and sometimes into Central America. We know, again, because they look at the chemical signature, and there's some remarkable sites up near Yellowstone that they have found some of those stones making it as far south as Belize, which is just amazing because it made it there completely on foot. Because horses came with the Spanish. It traveled on foot. One of my favorite stories as far as starting these large trading networks actually goes back to salt. Because while stone tools are really important for us processing food, salt is that next step in helping us preserve that food so that we then have enough time to start building other industries. And being able to access enough salt helped jumpstart us into starting to process things like metals, because we had to have enough food surplus for that to happen. Some of the most famous early salt trade routes actually are through the Sahara Desert. And there are very ancient wells that were designed so that the camels could be watered as they made the trek across the Sahara Desert to help provide salt to important early civilizations like the Babylonians, like the Egyptians, because those societies couldn't get started until they had a regular source of salt.
Interesting.
I've never thought of that. And so we started mining cutting tools, then we started mining salt. What would the next mining development be?
Then we start on the Middle Ages. And as we start to figure out what iron ore is, and bronze and copper, and how to manipulate and purify those different ores, we build step by step. Now, different places, we're at Bronze Ages at different points. So we can't just say this date. Different communities unlocked the different patterns at different times. And that's one of the reasons why different regions of the world have different smelting techniques. Because it was discovered multiple places at the globe in similar times.
In similar times. I have always been curious what that event would have been in any given location, as I understand what you're saying, that all of a sudden let somebody realize that I can take this green rock and heat it up and I can get copper, or whatever the process is. Is there any sort of indication how that leap got made?
Well, luckily we have some deposits that indicate that copper and gold probably were some of our first metals that we were able to, as humans, utilize. And a chunk of that is because we can take gold flakes out of a river and take a rock and pound them and turn it into something usable without adding heat. There are copper deposits that have a high enough purity that we can do a similar thing. Because copper is malleable enough and gold is malleable enough. Now, we probably went from that to taking ore where we can see we've got some of that precious metal that we want in that rock. Now we have to figure out how to get it out of the rock. And you get the process of crushing it up and heating it so you can separate out the two.
So what kind of time frames are we looking at? What's the earliest globally that you start seeing actual smelting going on?
Oh, my paleoarchaeology, I'm not all that good, so we're going to have to ask
Sarah. Let's throw that over to Sarah. The question, Sarah, is what is the earliest? Shannon has explained that it happened in different regions at different times. What are some of the earliest signs of actual smelting that we see?
Oh, that is a good question.
Oh, it was such a good question. I froze Sarah's screen up again. Okay, so we've got those kind of soft minerals that we start seeing being able to be smelted and turned into usable tools, and then alloying happening, right? Which is isn't that pretty much what defines when the Bronze Age would actually begin?
But there had to be one step that happened in between.
Okay.
We had to figure out how to make a flame hot enough. Now, some regions did that by producing charcoal. Others did it by figuring out how to mine coal. which gives us our first use of fossil fuels. And that actually centered in Asia.
Oh, where in Asia did they start mining coal first?
It was in China.
In China. That stands to reason. So you make a fire hot enough, you can actually start doing some more extraction of the minerals. Then you can do some shaping and then alloying of the minerals, right? And then that brings us all the way up into the Bronze Age. What then happens when you start seeing those combinations? What happens to them? Are there in mining technologies around that time?
Well, I'm sure Sarah can speak to this, but there are mines from that period which are...
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no, we lost Shannon.
You guys keep dropping out at just the right time for the other person to take the question.
What? No.
You're a little broken, Sarah, but we can still hear you. Well, or you're a lot broken.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So metal in rocks in to produce
In a lower. Okay.
fluid of lead thing from off figured happened to metal.
Would you go over
Oh no.
back over about the last 30 seconds?
Scott.
We're having a
So oh, it's all good. So so if you stick rock material in a fire or near a fire, heat it up changes the properties of the rock itself just for shaping it as to make it into a stone tool. And by doing that as well, you might be able to discover, that certain get up that that's up. People might have figuring out and kind of an interesting side thing later on, as people are using metal to make metal axe heads and things like that. It seemed that metal was a bit of a precious commodity. So if you're wealthier, you might have a metal axe head, but if you're not as wealthy, you'll have a stone tool axe head that's more likely to shatter. Whereas with a metal axe head, if it gets dull or broken, you can just kind of melt
Shannon, let's turn to you for a minute. Would you like to carry on with that thought? Can you extend that for us?
Make it look nice. Pose or
on that subject, on the metal axe heads, an awful lot of these metal axe heads we find in places like burials, and they're made out of things like copper and gold, which physically are incapable of cutting down trees. They can't take down an animal. These were purely ornamental. This was art. And so that gives us an idea that our ancestors valued gold much in the same ways we do. it was art. It was ornamentation. It was something to celebrate creating.
Huh, interesting. Okay, so now we've bridged on up through the Bronze Age, and we're almost ready to start talking about iron. What is the technological leap between bronze and iron? What happened, especially with the mining, that helped us make that leap?
So one of the big difference that you see between Bronze Age mines and Iron Age mines is Bronze Age mines, I could never have gone. You went with an animal fat candle, and you crawled on your belly, and you scraped out that line of ore that was in the ground. Once they started transitioning to iron, they had hard enough tools that they were able to create mines that you can actually crouch in. They did not build them high enough, but I could sit down and pound versus crawling on my belly and scraping out just that layer. So that would have made mining as someone in the Iron Age a whole lot more comfortable than someone mining in the Bronze Age.
Interesting. Sarah, I'm glad you've got some signal back. Welcome back to the conversation. Do you have anything to add to what was just said about we're talking about the transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and what made
The Iron Age.
that actually possible?
I think Shannon covered it.
So once we have iron, what do we want next? Well, we want steel, which means
So we've already learned how to alloy metals, right? By this time, we've been alloying metals for hundreds of years. Maybe, I don't know how long was the Bronze Age in the Upper Mediterranean, at least. We know it was different for different places.
in some areas it lasted for thousands.
So there's been alloying going on through all of that time. So people have figured out how to extract the copper, the other things that are being alloyed into copper to make bronze. The tin, which is, I guess, why the Romans wanted Britain, was for those mining resources, for the tin that was there. And now we can really see in the historical record some concentrations of population around those resources. Yeah.
The deeper you dig, the more supporting community you need, because people who are full-time miners, you've got to feed them. Even though in a lot of the world, miners were the bottom of the socioeconomics, they still had to have enough surplus food in their community. And during times of plague and famine, mining was often one of the first industries to fall by the wayside because they simply didn't have the manpower to do it.
Because it would have almost been a disposable leisure, almost. Luxury.
Metal items last for a long time. It's not like a wooden item where, or you have to have enough wood to keep your house warm during the winter. You have to have enough food to feed you through the winter. If you can't replace the axe this year because you can't do the mining, you'll wait 2, 3, 4 years down the road until it is practical again.
So let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned guns, germs, and steel right as part of our introduction, different parts of the world that had iron and had the resources to alloy iron into steel made big advances. Is that, as a result, is that a fair thing to say?
It did play a big role in a lot of different cultures' development.
Such as?
Anytime you deal with a firearm, you need something that's not going to shatter. And so you have to have a strong enough metal to contain that controlled explosion. You can't practically transport iron cannons that readily. You can build them. They weigh tons, literally. So that's one of the reasons a lot of these first munitions were based on boats, because that was the only practical way to go attack someone else.
So some of these same boats, as I understand it, are being used to transport ore and transport back finished goods, especially in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, from Germany up into the Scandinavian countries, especially. And so is it fair to say that leap is what let Europe be the big colonizers?
It was one of the big reasons why they were able to take over different realms. Throughout history, whoever controlled the mining trade routes controlled that empire. So the Romans controlled the salt. The Chinese controlled the coal trade in that region. So you had different empires that were based around their trade routes, and many of these trade routes were based around goods that were produced via mining.
So we've got all sorts of leaps forward because we've got metals. We can make farming tools. We can make better mining tools. The means of mining now has gone from that scoot on your belly and scrape out the vein of ore into the kind of mining that we see really only happening at the start of the Industrial Revolution, when they started strip mining. Let's talk a little bit about why it made economic sense to strip mine.
Dynamite is cheap.
Dynamite's a lot cheaper than labor.
Well, people were also considered cheap, and dynamite was cheap. When that combination, when those two things combined, it made it very easy to do things like mountaintop removal, because you really didn't care about the local communities. You didn't really care about the people if there was an accident. We didn't have OSHA, thank goodness for OSHA. And so the response was, what is going to be the cheapest and quickest way to make the buck? And when you have known veins of these rocks, whether it be the banded iron formations up in the Great Lakes region, whether it be coal in the Appalachians, whether it be copper here in Utah, the answer was, well, labor's cheap, dynamite's cheap. Let's take the entire mountain down and get every last gram of the stuff we want out of that mountain.
My family history, I had a lot of ancestry come from Sweden and Finland when the Utah mining boom happened. they came over in that time frame. They were some of that cheap labor, that disposable labor. I don't want to insert myself too much into this topic, but it really seems like we mentioned quite a ways back that miners were almost disposable. They were the bottom rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, and to some extent still are. We thank goodness for OSHA, thank goodness for the labor movement that changed that to some degree, but now as a society, it seems to me that we're moving away from mining in the first world countries, and we've decided we have taken as much of our own resources as we want to. We want to celebrate our mountaintops now. We want somebody else's mountaintops to go away. So we're exporting that. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes and no. We're starting to change some of that a little bit because we're realizing that exporting our mining completely is a national security issue. If all of your rare earth metals, which are required for things like your cell phone and your computer or your car, and rare earth metals are remarkably unrare, they're just complicated to process out of soils. We're starting to rehome some of those technologies, and they're marketing to Europe because we now have the technology to do it at a much more green level. Turns out, coal produced in the United States, there are some types of coal here that don't exist pretty much anywhere else on Earth and are critical for drinking water infrastructure. We're never going to stop mining that because that coal is too valuable to burn. We need it for other things. Feldspar is the second most mined mineral here in the United States after copper. Feldspar is for making glass. So as we're stopping to do things like mining for metals, we're starting to mine for other things that are critical for our day-to-day lives.
So we were talking before the live session started about mining for feldspar and silica, and how some less developed countries are actually having their beaches stolen.
Silica is actually a resource that the United States is remarkably poor in, because silica requires sand, and desert sand won't cut it. It has to be ocean sand. It has to be the right type of ocean sand. And so countries are actually, in the dead of night, stealing other countries' beaches in order to get enough sand to produce our global need for glass.
I knew that was true for concrete. I didn't realize it was also true of glass for sand, or sand for glass. Didn't realize that compounded that issue.
We mine for a whole lot more resources than we realize. Oftentimes, it's a conversation just about metal. But as we've learned here today, it started with stone. We still quarry and mine for stone all over the world. It's a component of our day-to-day lives and what we build. We mine for clay. Porcelain, bricks are all mined clay. We mine for silica. We mine for salt. There are so many things we get through the process of mining.
Coincidentally, I just bought a 20 by 10 inch by 3 inch gravestone for a long dead ancestor that was mined from somewhere. Somebody cut that piece of rock and cut it and shaped and polished it. And I don't know. I would love to know how they managed to do it so cheaply. But engraved and everything else, the thing came to me for $300.
Wow.
And it is just amazing to me how industrialized the processes of resource extraction have become, is on just such a mammoth scale. Well, I would really. Well, I'm sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was going to say, with things like mining for oil, I mean, it still can be a dangerous process because you're dealing with something that's pressurized, that you're sticking a machine in the earth to get it out. But it's a lot safer than, digging in your backyard and having a gusher. And we can tap a lot more of it as well because of that, because of the technology we have as well. We can plumb more deeply. We can plumb in the middle of the ocean instead of trying to plumb in the middle of the desert or something like that as well.
Well, great. I hope for those of you who are listening to this, I hope this has been useful in your world building, that you have a little bit better understanding of how these resources have come into play in our world and help you create your own world from the resources that you mine from your mind. Thank you. Do you, Shannon and Sarah, have any closing words you'd like to add before we take a couple of questions?
I think I'll pass, so we have enough time for at least one question, because we've got less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions that have come in over the chat?
We do have one question. Miranda Moore asks, why won't any old sand work for glass? And can you still make sub-quality glass with regular sand?
The answer is no. Desert sand has a completely different shape and structure to the polishing and purification that happens with ocean sand. Ocean sand has been washed and all of its impurities have been removed. Desert sand is a whole bunch of shards of whatever local rocks that wind had access to, and it is too impure to get anything resembling glass. You can get lightning hitting desert sand and you can get something similar to glass, but it is so impure that we cannot use it for tools.
Thank you. Good question. Let me follow that question with a real quick one. What is the main mineral in ocean sand that gives us the silica? I mean, what kind of rocks did it come from?
Most of the ones that we are paying attention to are from tiny little ocean creatures that end up forming the sand, and they make their skeletons out of silica. So they're little zooplankton that make it, and that is what we end up making glass out of.
We make our glass out of skeletons, in other words. Okay, this has been fascinating. I want to thank Shannon and Sarah both for your time, and thanks for listening, folks.
Thank you for your discussing this topic, and we want to thank you thank the viewers for attending this presentation or this panel as well. And this is the last panel for this particular room. So I guess if the panelists would like to continue on, and if they don't have anything else to do, we could do that, or we could go ahead and close it right now.
I think unless we have any more questions, let's go ahead and close it.
We do have a couple more questions if you.
I'm
Sure.
I'm more than willing to hang around. You bet.
Okay. So let's see. So Broommaker asks, it sounds like mining has changed quite a bit over the years. Are there any new developments in mining you know of today?
So there's the onshoring of, we're starting to onshore mining back to the United States, which is a big one.
Connectivity.
There is one particular mineral that we're struggling to start mining for again. And it's not one that you're probably is on your list. Helium. We are starting to drop really low on our helium reserves, and so the search and the hunt for helium is on again. And we find helium and uranium often paired together. So that's an interesting local adventure that we're going on, because you have to have the right geology to trap the helium so we can find helium bubbles and then extract it.
I imagine the extraction process for helium is not just drill into the hole and let it come out.
No, because if you do that, it goes to space. We lose helium to outer space.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Miranda Moore asks, before OSHA, what was the most common kind of mining injuries and fatalities?
Interesting. All kinds of things. I guess if you're using explosives, you could lose your life, you could lose limbs. Beyond that, you might have to worry about cave collapsing, or Paleolithic people actually went into.
We have a lot of examples of Paleolithic people that were stuck in cave-ins, and some of them were actually mummified.
That's yeah. Big one collapse, or just getting stuck behind a cave-in. Uh-oh.
Which is still going on to this day. We keep hearing about groups of Chinese miners getting trapped and big long rescue efforts and all sorts of things.
Toxic gas is another significant one. We have lots of examples, especially locally, of toxic gas. And then we also have examples of communities that were wiped out because of toxic water. The process of extracting the metals poisoned their water supply and ended up, over time, killing the entire community.
If I can jump back directly to that question, I'm an OSHA guy. That was my professional life. And I worked for Southern California Edison when we were doing a lot of tunneling through granite in the Sierras. And the most common injury that we found in those granite tunnels was just simply a chunk of loose rock falling. Probably outnumbered any other injury dozens to one. No matter what kind of precautions you take, when these tunnels would have guys that did nothing else than go along with crowbars looking for loose pieces of rock that were about to fall and knocking them down before they could fall on somebody. But that's a very, 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 very common mining injury. And back in the days before social programs and whatnot, somebody has a piece of rock fall on them, the family starves. Just from a broken leg, they can't work, the family starves.